All right, let's get right into it. Today we're going to pull back the curtain on the magic that powers pretty much everything in our modern world. Your phone, the internet, artificial intelligence, all of it. And it all boils down to one simple, kind of profound question.
So what do you think? Is it oil? Gold? Maybe diamonds? You know, for most of human history, those would have been some pretty solid answers. But today, the most critical, the most essential resource for human progress, it's something way, way more common.
Yeah, you heard that right. It's sand. But look, we're not talking about just any old sand from the beach. We're talking about highly, highly purified sand. Why? Because hidden inside this humble material is silicon, the element that forms the foundation for the billions, and I mean billions, of tiny switches inside the very device you're watching this on.
Think about that for a second. We figured out how to take the dust of the Earth, organize it, and structure it in such a precise way that it can perform calculations. We literally taught sand how to think. So the question is, how on earth did we manage to do that?
Okay, so how did we do it? Well, the whole secret, the key to everything, is learning how to perfectly control the flow of electricity. And to get that, we need to look at two really basic types of materials.
Let's just think of electricity as traffic, right? On one hand, you've got conductors like copper wire. That's a wide-open, 8-lane superhighway. Electrons just flow, no problem. On the other hand, you have insulators like rubber. That's a solid brick wall. Nothing gets through. For the longest time, we thought those were our only two choices: go and stop.
But then we found this Goldilocks material, the semiconductor. It's just right. See, under normal conditions, it's a brick wall, an insulator. But if you give it a little nudge, a little bit of voltage, it suddenly turns into a highway. It can be both. And that ability to switch from off to on, that changes everything. And here's the kicker. If you can control the flow, if you can turn it on and off, you can create a code. On or off, yes or no, 1 or 0. And that simple binary choice, that is the fundamental language of every single computer on the planet.
But our first shot at building these electrical switches was, let's just say it was a little clumsy. Back in the 1940s, if you wanted a computer, you didn't go to the Apple Store. You had to build an entire room, sometimes an entire building, for a machine like the famous ENIAC.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 27 tons. That was the weight of the ENIAC computer. It took up almost 2,000 square feet. It was an absolute monster of a machine. And the reason it was so enormous...
Vacuum tubes. These things were basically glorified light bulbs that acted as switches. And they were just awful. I mean, they were huge, they got ridiculously hot, and they were constantly burning out. Seriously, the staff had to run around with shopping carts full of spare parts just to keep the thing from breaking down. This was just not going to work long term.
So a new solution was desperately needed. And the breakthrough, what you could really call the big bang of the digital age, it came in 1947 from a team of brilliant scientists who wanted to replace that fragile glass with solid rock.
Over at Bell Labs, 3 scientists, Bardeen, Bratton, and Shockley, cobbled together this jagged little thing made of germanium and gold foil. I mean, it was ugly, but you know what? It worked. They'd created the world's first solid-state switch. They decided to call it the transistor.
And this just shows you the night and day difference. The transistor did everything the vacuum tube could do, but it was tiny, it created almost no heat, and it was incredibly reliable. It didn't burn out. It was a complete and total revolution. So, how in the world did this little piece of rock actually work?
So what's the secret sauce here? How do you take a piece of silicone, which is normally a brick wall, an insulator, and turn it into a controllable switch? The answer is this process that sounds kind of weird, but it's pure genius. It's called doping.
Okay, to get this, let's use an analogy. Picture a game of musical chairs. In pure silicon, every atom has a chair, and every single chair is full. Now, for what we call N-type doping, we sprinkle in an element like phosphorus, which brings an extra player to the game, but with no chair to sit on. That's a free electron. Then, for P-type doping, we add an element like boron, which brings an empty chair, what physicists call a hole.
Okay, so this is where the real magic happens. When you smash these two different types of silicon together, you create what's called a p-n junction.
And instantly, right at that border, all those extra electrons from the N side see those empty chairs on the P side and just rush over to fill them. This creates this tiny neutral zone right in the middle. It's like an electrical no man's land. There are no free electrons and no empty holes. And that little zone acts like a barrier, a dam, blocking any more electricity from getting through. It's a one-way gate.
And by sandwiching these layers, maybe in an NPN configuration, you create a transistor. The absolute best way to think about it is like this garden hose. A tiny, tiny trickle of electricity applied to that middle layer, the base, is like a tiny turn of a handle. But that little action opens the gate and unleashes a massive flow of current through the whole thing. So it's not just a switch, it's also an amplifier.
So we had the perfect switch. Awesome. But now we had a new challenge: scale. How do you wire together not just a few thousand of these things, but millions, and eventually billions of these tiny transistors?
Hand soldering every single component was a total nightmare of wires. Engineers literally called it the tyranny of numbers. So the solution was just radical. Instead of making all these tiny transistors and then wiring them together, they thought, why not carve the transistors and the wires directly into a single solid piece of silicon? And that was the invention of the integrated circuit, or as we all know it, the chip.
And this single invention led to one of the most powerful, almost prophetic observations in the history of technology: Moore's Law. Intel's co-founder Gordon Moore noticed that the number of transistors we could cram onto a chip was doubling roughly every 2 years. And this wild exponential growth has held steady for over 50 years. It's taken us from a few thousand transistors in '71 to millions in the '90s to literally tens of billions today, all on a chip the size of your fingernail.
To really put that miniaturization into perspective, just try to wrap your head around this. If you tried to build a modern iPhone chip using that 1940s vacuum tube technology, the final computer would be physically larger than all of New York City, and it would need more power than the entire world currently produces just to turn it on. That is the unbelievable power of the transistor and the integrated circuit.
And this isn't just a cool history lesson. This stuff is the engine of our future. The AI revolution that's happening right now, it's all driven by GPUs, which are really just massive math factories with billions and billions of transistors. The green energy transition relies on solar panels, which are basically just giant semiconductors. And electric cars need incredibly sophisticated power semiconductors to manage their batteries and motors.
So, from simple conductors and insulators to the bizarre magic of doping, to the invention of the transistor, and finally to billions of these tiny switches carved onto a single chip, every single time you tap on your phone, you are commanding an army of particles to dance through a crystal that was once nothing more than sand on a beach. It really leaves